And we're live with our 135th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. This week is just me and Ken again. We've got some guests that are coming up in the future, but yeah, there's been a lot that's been going on around the league over the last week or so. So we do have a lot to talk about, or we've got a lot of articles. If there is a topic that you would like us to cover today or something specific, please jump into the Slack channels or hit us up, or even the YouTube comment stream. We don't necessarily have a set agenda today, so wanted to make sure to give people an opportunity to speak up and to say something. From Derek, yeah. Speaking of our Black Hat class, right? We will be teaching our next level hacking secure code edition or something like that. I can't remember exactly what we called it. I should know off the top of my head, but I don't. It's a modified version of Seth and Ken's Excellent Adventures in Code Review, and teaches you how to do secure code review, right? The mechanics that Ken and I use on a daily basis. I think we mentioned last week, right? Finding some really cool timing attacks, all because of code review, right? And it is difficult. It takes some patience. It takes some, it takes a framework, right? Ken and I have learned it over the years, and we apply it on a daily basis. So anyway, if you're interested in that, please reach out. We are looking at doing some other just online or in-person courses later in the summer. And we'll see how Black Hat, we just wanted to see what the response there is going to be before we schedule out the rest of the year, just based on COVID and people's travel and everything else. We'd much rather do it in person. It's a lot more fun than doing it online. So, Ken, anything else? Anything that I'm missing at this point?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think you're missing anything. No, sorry. I'm struggled. It's riding the struggle bus. So, no, I think you're good. I think you've mentioned it all. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, I guess we can just dive into it.
Derek did ask a question about a GoSDL, and I, if you don't mind, I do want to pick that one up because I'm actually in the midst of, dealing with that a project for that. So it just happens to be really on my radar right now. Okay. So your question is, what's that? Ahead.
No, I was going to say, describe what GoSDL is first, and then we can get into it. But yeah, the question was.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. The question was, what do you think about GoSDL from Slack and that they'll have a new version out? So GoSDL and Listo from Seek, our good friend Julian Burton, who was on the podcast, his team open sourced Listo, which is just like GoSDL. It's built similar. But basically, this is a self-service, what it says on the project, self-service entry point. But let me, for security reviews and SDL, so I can give you like a version of what we do and why we're trying to use something along this same line. So, and then why this GoSDL and Listo maybe don't meet all of the requirements. So for us, we do have a security review process. Like if you're going to have a new app online, or if you're going to have, there's certain features that when they're baked in for us that, fall under certain requirements. And so they have to have a security review. And so there's 5 or 6 different departments that end up weighing in on these open security review tickets, code review being one of them, or assessment, dynamic review, whatever you want to call it, basically web security stuff. We're just one department. There's many. And the idea that we would like to go to, which GoSDL and Listo help with, is, have the developers go through, answer, questions, give us information about where they fall in the service catalog and ownership, and then like what, there's each department will have their own set of questions. Like obviously web security might ask like, hey, what framework are you using? What language, what libraries for CSRF, et cetera, et cetera. And then like at the end of that, maybe we realize, hey, in an automated fashion, of course, you have 42 requirements that you have to implement for your app. So the idea is that, there's collateral built for that. So that's what we're looking for at like a very broad level. So GoSDL and Listo help, help with that end of things. I think they dump into Trello. Both products dump into, meaning like any requirements would be dumped into like Trello cards essentially. So I think it's overall pretty cool. I think both products are awesome, and it's open source. It's not going to be perfect, but it's open source, so you can modify things as you see fit. For us, our requirements are more comprehensive than what these tools allow for a number of reasons. A lot of it has to do with other departments having different requirements and it needing to be something that fits the bill for all departments, not just like web security. So think, risk and compliance, like GRC stuff and whatnot. So for us, there's like I said, we're exploring different options. These two didn't work for us, but again, I think they're perfectly great, fine tools. Just there's limitations. So that's sort of my thought on there. Namely, some limitation would be, we want with GitHub, we'd like to dog food our own product. So we would like better integration there with GitHub. And then there's other things like, making the, I don't know. I actually don't know about the API. If there is an API, there might be with GoSDL, but an API that allows us to do some analytics and analysis in general on the data. So seeing like, for instance, one point of data that might be interesting is like, hey, with these requirements, did we get less or more bug bounty submissions? This is just an example, by the way. I'm just making stuff up. Let's say we like got bug bounty submissions in for something that had those requirements, and maybe it had less bug bounty submissions than apps that didn't have any requirements. Maybe we could figure out some causation there and correlation, but like, again, that's just me making something up off the top of my head for why we would need those analytics. There's other reasons that are more valid. So anyways, that's a long rant, but I guess I'm saying it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I dig the self-service nature, right? Like I think back to, one of the jobs where I was working for a company in the finance industry, right? And remember having this huge spreadsheet that we would send to software architects, right? And have them go answer all of these questions. And, it was just like the out of band nature of it, right, was always the difficult portion, at least for the company that I was working with, right? The fact that somebody on our team had to parse those spreadsheets, and they'd have to create the Jira tickets or the Trello items, whatever, right? And so it does close that loop a little bit. It doesn't feel very right as of right now. It doesn't feel very DevSecOpsy or whatever you want to call it, right? Because it is still this out of band process that has to happen to determine what those requirements look like. And we always ran into the problem that, again, business rules, right? And I mean, at least at the company that I was at. So even though the software architects would fill out this form, it didn't really matter what we put in there unless we threw a huge fit, because they would just push it through, right? They'd push through whatever feature it was that the business wanted, because that equated to actual money. And so like that constant battle that we had, business and security versus usability versus features, it all came to a head because of the spreadsheet that was being sent around. And so at some point it became, okay, how do we slim this down? How do we make it more appropriate? How do we set up guardrails so we just know that people are using the right framework in the right way? I don't know. I mean, so like, are those some of the issues that you're running into those with, Ken, or is it just more of the GitHub-y style of things that you're looking for?
Yeah, no, it's actually exactly that. So like we used to have a much longer list of questions. And so we parsed that down, we being all 5 or 6 departments, whatever it is. I think it's 5 departments. We've parsed our questions down to the absolute minimum necessary questions. And then based off of their answers, we will follow up with additional questions. There's a couple problems though, like the SLA, like, so assume you have a SLA, right, of like 3 days to respond to one of these. Yeah, that's pretty hard to meet. And also, like, let's say, let's just start there. It's dependent on a person to actually like pick up the new request and see that it's there and then like go through. And now you also have to, as a human being, go through and see like, okay, based off of these answers, what are the next questions I should be asking, right? And then it just goes on from there. Like, for instance, we maybe we'll open up a review because we decide this is something we should do a code review on. All right, well, then in there, we now have to go through and figure out like manually which requirements seem applicable to your app and then dump in like a markdown of checklist items and then have to walk through with the devs, you know, I'm boring myself talking about it. I mean, this is like, it's terrible. Like it's not fun and it doesn't make any sense. And it's very human response intensive. So what, like, honestly, I'm putting myself to sleep talking about it. So it's like, what would be more appropriate is based off of your answer. You know, like if you ever set up a Google form, you can set up like, okay, if they said no to this, don't even ask the next 6 questions. If they said yes to it, ask another question. If that question's yes, then like, or depending on the answer, then do something else, go to another flow, ask additional questions. And that's what we really need essentially, is the same kind of logic. Now there's a lot more requirements than just that, but that's essentially what it comes down to, is like, we've got some initial questions, each department. We need to make it less person intensive, not make people wait a whole lot of time to get a response from each department. And then of course the follow-on questions and all that. Instead, just do it. When you start that flow, by the time you're done, you have your action items, you know exactly what needs to happen. No human being had to respond to get going. And that's where we're trying to go, is truly self-service, whereas it's very people intense. And it's just, prone to errors, prone to laggy response times. So the products themselves are great and that can be built upon. For us, I think we're just looking for something that's already kind of prepackaged or built in a specific way. So, yeah.
I mean, that's always difficult, right? Like the whole bespoke nature of those questionnaires, what it is that's required based on the company, where you're actually at. So and that's why I brought up the spreadsheet, right? And kind of the back and forth nature of what goes on there, because it doesn't necessarily equate to, hey, I'm pushing products out quickly. It's a difficult problem to solve, right? So while I do see people using GoSDL and Listo, right? It's typically in that. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear where people actually use it, like in what phases of the SDLC and what their responses have been for rolling that out and how effective it is. I mean, I know Slack is using it, right? So it'd be interesting to talk to those guys, but it was very custom built for Slack and their own development processes. So,
yeah, I mean, if anybody is using it other than Slack folks, please reach out and maybe we can get your take on it. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Love to hear it. I'm just not using it in production just because, like I said, there's just other requirements than just our own, which I mean, I think that's one thing to take away, is like advocate for, if you're doing a self-service security review process, then you should probably think about any other departments that have, because like, for example, there's another tool that we had seen that was demoed to us, and it had not just other departments, but it had things like around trade restrictions, like for other countries. So like, what country are you operating in? And then based off of that, if it's China, then it's got XYZ requirements, right? Versus like, maybe I'm making shit up, Belgium, very different. So, like it's something to think about. There's like other departments that might need to do this stuff. So
yeah. Yep. Cool.
CSV Postman API. I like that. I like Larry's
make it rain tickets.
Yeah, make it rain tickets. I like it. I do think that GoSDL plugs into Jira, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's the long and short of that. Yeah, I'd be curious to see if anyone's using it in prod.
Yeah. I mean, that integration is pretty, I almost view it as a necessity nowadays. You've got to be able to talk to wherever the issues, like the developer issues, reside in order to get stuff fixed. Right? You really want to affect security, you've got to be plugged into that phase. I mean, that's one of the things that we always talk about from an external perspective as a third party. We give teams the option for us to actually insert our findings directly into Jira, right, or into an issue tracker, because it makes life easier for them. They're not getting a PDF report that then they have to parse out. We already understand that that's how developers that are working, right? That's their workflow. They're not going to want to look at a PDF. They're not going to want to open a PDF, even if it's attached to an issue, to figure out what's going on, because it just takes them out of the flow. I mean, it's the same thing when we do code review, right? Anything that takes us out of the flow is bad. And it just makes more work.
I fax developers. No, I fax them.
You fax them?
I fax them my web inspect. My web inspect results, usually around 3,000 to 4,000 pages long. It takes a while, but fax is how business gets done these days, Seth. All right. Get up with the times, man.
Get up with the times.
New facsimile tech. It's all the rage. No, yeah, you're right. I mean, nobody wants to read a fucking 56-page PDF. And by the way, we're both like Seth's exhausted. I've been sick all weekend, so we're in a mood today. So
just beware. Yeah. But I think about it, right? Like, I think about those reports that we wrote for that large retailer that we worked with, right? When we initially started working together. Oh. How much of that was just cut and paste directly out of a source code analysis tool, like a static analysis tool. And I'm like, I can't figure out how useful those actually were, because we'd get the same app back a year later, and they'd have solved like 2 of the 5,000 different endpoints that we had listed in a finding. And yeah. So we have done that, right? Like, learn from our mistakes. It's not super useful to send out a 1,000-page report, especially when you want a developer to do something.
Yeah. Nobody has time for that stuff. So no, I agree. I like plopping it right into which I like. Yeah. Again, so I think GoSDL does that with Jira as well. So that's the more things you plug into, the better. And I'm sure there's if they've set up I actually don't know, but if they set it up in a modular way, I'm assuming there's you can build connectors for other things besides those two. So I would assume, I don't know. Like I said, we dug in a little bit. It was a while ago. I would be curious about the new version, though.
Well, I'm not seeing a new version yet, right? Because it's all still that same PHP code that was written 2 to 3 years ago, right? That's up on their GitHub instance anyway, unless I'm looking in the wrong spot. But I'm pretty sure this is the host for it.
Yeah.
But it does. I mean, it talks directly to Jira. I'd be interested to see what they're doing with it. You and I are both not fans of PHP, so that's all. And honestly, that was a huge consideration for people when I've talked to them about GoSDL and using it. Right? What technologies? Oh, it's PHP. Right? Well, I don't know. Right? It's no knock on Slack. Right? It's just there is a perception that PHP is less than, I guess, right? I know it can be done securely, but just the dangers that go along with it are hard. Yes, Larry, PHP it needs to die, but it's not going anywhere, right? I can't figure out why the interpreted, right? We've seen classic ASP is gone, Cold Fusion, right? So these languages that were used that PHP was contemporaries with have disappeared. And yet PHP has hung on. I'm not sure if that's just because of WordPress or the open source nature of PHP that they have done objective. I don't know, right?
I don't know either.
Is it object-oriented programming or what?
Is it just WordPress propping up PHP at this point? I don't
It's a
know.
vicious cycle, right? Between the two of them. Why
Yeah.
use PHP? Hold on, I'm gonna Google that.
Yeah, but I feel like that every time someone's like, because I've done so much work in the Ruby space, people seem to
People ask the same question.
the three people that know me tend to think that like that's like it's my bread and butter or something. Like that's what all I do is Ruby. So I get the same kind of crap for using, and I'm like, I haven't written in Ruby in a while. Like I don't even know, but yeah, I mean, I think GitHub's monolith is still in Ruby, so there's probably that too. But yeah, I get the same amount of like hate for or not hate, but like, why are you using that for Ruby as PHP these days? I feel like people are treating it more like that as well, which probably segues into our bundler for our part 2 of the bundler drama saga, dependency confusion stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, honestly, this goes to, and I know that languages like come and go in popularity, right? Like that's, you and I've been around long enough. We understand that. We see that happen all the time. I mean, I think it was what, Nathan Hamill that first like started giving you crap about Ruby. Even though, like, if we go back
11 years ago, 12 years ago.
Yeah, I know, because, well, and it was because we started to use it for the web exploitation framework, right?
Yeah, because it was
fishnet days, because that's what's his bucket was using for Metasploit, right? And so we're like, oh yeah, there's some modern features. The meta programming is pretty cool. It makes it really easy for plugins and everything else. Yeah. So
I don't know if people realize that Metasploit was originally Perl too. I don't know if people realize that there was a rewrite to Ruby. It used to be all like
Perl 6. Yeah. Perl 6 is out. Come on. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they went the Ruby route. And like, I don't know also if people realize the reason there's a lot of reasons you could go the Ruby route, but like the reason for the Ruby route, it was the whole idea of at runtime, it being able to just like basically load modules dynamically, being able to, because it has the ability to write code on the fly. It's pretty useful when you're dealing, especially with like a CLI prompt where you're doing things like entering in a command and hitting tab, right? Something as simple as that. That's actually not, that seems simple. Like I put in like set payload and then some options, right? And you could do SE tab or S tab and it'll like, autocomplete and all that stuff. People don't even realize like how difficult that wow, what is that GIF? That is distracting on our Slack. Sorry. Anyways, that's hilarious. I'm going to try to unsee that. Jabba the Hutt GIF. Where was I? Yeah, no. So it's actually pretty hard to do autocomplete, or not hard, but it's there's little things you don't really have to think about if you're just the end user, but it's actually pretty hard. Like when for instance, you've got like a modules folder, and you've got all these different named files, and they're all inheriting from the same class. At the end of the day, they're all inheriting from the same base class. The way you do that is you can plop a file on there and reload, and it all happens without really like having to stop the program, make changes, recompile the program, and then run it again, right? You can do all of this dynamically. You take a little bit of a hit for sure on memory, but that's one of the beautiful parts of Ruby is that it's just very flexible and dynamic at runtime. There's a far more succinct version of this I could talk about, but you and I know, like, I tried this in Python with Weird Al, and it worked. There's some level of metaprogramming with Python. But again, if I was to try to do this with like a Golang app, I mean, it wouldn't work the same way. Those are, again, like a runtime interpreted language versus like a compiled language is night and day in terms of building a tool like that. So anyways, that's the reason they went with it. That's the reason we decided to follow the same pattern for Ruby.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got a lot of shit for it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it was
from friends,
right? Yeah. And it wasn't like, it was definitely a learning experience, right, and an interesting project to work on. And I don't think people give enough credit to that, like the open source projects that don't take off. Like I mean, GitHub's littered with them, right? We all know that. How many of the projects that are out there, have less than 5 stars or whatever, that are experiments by whoever. But a lot of that is, I don't know, it ends up guiding your career, right? Like the stuff that you figure out in those, when you try and solve those hard problems and figure out, oh, this is why someone would want to choose Ruby over another language, or maybe this is why they went with PHP instead of Ruby or something else. I don't know. Yeah. And so it would be interesting to talk to the Slack guys on why they chose PHP for that, if it was just like ease of use, whoever started it, or what. So yeah, what are you going to say?
No, there are definitely times where, like I'll give you a perfect example. There was this Bubby connector, back in the day, where Ruby could be used to write essentially it's JRuby, Java Ruby. But anyways, like it was essentially a connector where Ruby code could be used in the JVM, converted to the like Java JVM bytecode. And all that means is that I could write pretty much Ruby stuff and Ruby syntax, but importing like Java libraries and doing things that connect and allow me to basically control burp through Ruby scripts. So there was a lot of work done. It was really cool conceptually. At the end of the day, though, I found it was much easier to just write Java code and just write Java burp plugins in Java. And I think I have some videos still out there from when we used to do setcasts of like doing Python, Ruby, and Java extensions for burp. But again, like, yeah, there's definitely times where it just doesn't make sense. And I think that's one of those times where writing Java, as much as I'm not a fan of writing a lot of Java, was a lot easier.
Yeah.
I mean, you won't hear me say that very often about Java. That's a lot easier, but that was one of those times where it definitely was. So,
well, it's all the target, right? Like it's all the task that you're trying to accomplish. How fast can you get something out? Can you get it done, built in a secure manner? And, if, I don't know, the more complexity that you introduce into some of those functions, into some of those programs, the more likelihood there is for failure, for security issues, for, the list goes on and on. So at some point, it just makes more sense to dive in just like the original developers did. And that's another point that we always bring up in the course, right? Is, hey, you're looking at code that was developed using Visual Studio. Use Visual Studio to look at that code, right? You're going to make your life. It may be that you prefer, Eclipse, or you may prefer a different IDE, but you're just making life harder for yourself.
Yeah. I think that is one thing that separates us from developers as code reviewers, is that, yeah, you're right. Like as a developer, you're usually working in I'm giving general stuff here. There's certainly contractors who they work on whatever their clients' requirements are, but there's more often than not, the developers that I come across, they're building in the way they feel like building, with the language and the tools they feel like building. Whereas we have to be far more flexible and change our workflow depending on what we're looking at. If we're doing our job really well, then you're right. I didn't really think about that before, but you're right. Like that is something that really separates us. Yeah.
And that's the other thing, right? Like being a polyglot, right? Being able to write programs in multiple languages. Most of the developers that you talk to stick pretty close to 2 or 3 different languages that they become like experts in their craft in, which I totally get, because that's, you spend so much time building something in, C#.net, and like you're going to stick pretty close to that original base that you have, because those are the expertise. Those are what people pay you to actually use. But the way that we come into it and having to review all of these different code bases, I end up thinking a lot more in abstract terms about code than I do about the nuances themselves. And I have to dive into documentation so often to figure out where problems exist. because I'm not an expert on low levels of C#, right? Like, or some of the libraries that are out there, the latest versions. And so I do feel like, and I don't know if you're the same way, but I feel like I spend an inordinate amount of time figuring out how languages implement the same problem or implement the same function.
Yeah, that definitely does happen, where sometimes it's like a stupid iterator on like an array and you're like, oh crap, I remember this kind of in this language, but like what's the, and like I'm saying iteration, but there's so many things you can do to optimize an iteration in terms of slicing out certain parts that you want, how you want to order those items, what you want to do with them. Do you want to build a new like hash or array? Like for instance, in Ruby, there's like inject and select on arrays, and those are really helpful operators. There's maybe not like a great analogous function in some other languages. So it's like, it does take a long time. I've gotten asked, this is funny because I've gotten asked this question a bunch, which is, okay, I want to learn, like I'm learning AppSec. I want to get better. Like how do I go for, breadth or do I go for depth? So meaning, do I want to learn a little bit about each language, kind of what you're talking about, or do I want to go in deep dive? For me, I found that by deep diving into one language first and learning all the intricacies and all the little options and writing a bunch of code and doing it in that one language first was like for me, the best way, because then it was very easy. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's like learning any language, right? Once you've especially as an adult, learned a second language, then it's easier to start to pick up like how to learn other languages. And I feel like with coding, that's really the case for me. When I learned really in depth one language, it was easy to pick up the syntax and the little changes and little things that change between languages. But if you understand the underlying concepts really, really well, then it's just so easy to pick up like additional languages. And yeah, it might take you a while. Like you said, you might have to look at the documentation, but you get the idea of it. You understand the data structures and all that, and like code structure.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I always go back to this, right? Because when I know you don't have a CS degree, right? But like when I did my computer science courses, at the time I was already working, right? Like as an administrator and programmer. And it was one of those things where I was like, I don't know if I'm really ever going to use this, right? I'm learning about different algorithms, red black trees, and like the security courses that they had were ridiculous, right? But like all the different algorithms, data structures, and everything else. But what I found over the course of my career is being able to speak that language and understand what developers are talking about. And I know you've done this through different ways, right? You've built code, you've taken the time to learn these things in a different way. But being able to understand what the developers are talking about and parsing what's going on in different code pushes and everything else is extremely useful, even if it's not security related. And if only of them, and you can talk. Talk the talk. You may not be able to implement a red black tree, right? But if you understand the basic concepts of that, it's going to help, later in life, just to be able to relate what a developer's going through, so that they're comfortable coming to you when they do have a security problem that needs addressing.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah,
I've sat at the table with many developers at different development conferences. I feel like that's been the kind of the fun way to connect, like you said, and to learn more. Because like I do think you should be a programming centric person if you're doing code reviews. Obviously, it's helpful to go to developer conferences and learn. And I've said it many times at the table, and just sort of like felt like. At least I understood what was going on, right? If I didn't have that background, it'd be pretty. And that's the weird thing is I've definitely come across professionals in the AppSec space who have never really learned any of this. That they stayed on the dynamic side purposefully. I've never really asked why. But I have definitely met AppSec professionals who are not heavy code reviewers. They run Dast tools and do a lot of dynamic stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel that's limiting because you don't really understand the other side of it. And I don't know how your remediation can be super specific, but for some people that works.
Well, and I think I mean, there's such a lack of talent in the industry that I get why that can be the case, right? There's not a lot of security people out there. I mean, this came up again, right? And you remember a few years ago that, the Army is like, oh, we're going to build our cyber division or whatever they called it, right? We're going to hire, 30,000, cybersecurity professionals. And all of us are looking around going, you realize that the industry has maybe, what I mean? Like, it's extremely small. And especially as you get into these different niches, like there's just not that many people out there. You may be able to train up a whole bunch, right? Because you've got Army recruits. But I look at that most recent, and this wasn't even on our list to talk about, but I guess we're going to go there. So that recent cybersecurity push from the White House, right? And this is the same issue that they're going to run into is, yeah, it's great that you want to do all this stuff, but the industry is small. There's a lack of professionals that are out there. When we push people in too quickly, that's when mistakes are made. And this all goes back to the pipeline issue, which is its own bag of crap that went on with that, right? But I don't see the education possibilities that are out there. Yes, there's more security programs that exist nowadays, right? People can get into the industry through multiple different forms, but we've also specialized in 5,000 different segments, right? You've got people that are really good at ICS systems or IoT. You've got application security, network security, right? Like it's not like everyone that comes into the industry is going to be a generalist that can go and solve a problem, as the general public sees it. And so if anything, I think the demand for jobs is still outpacing the people coming into the field. Right? Unless you see it differently. I mean, you're hiring people more than I am, so you understand what that's like.
We're doubling the headcount at GitHub security department, and I've been a part of that effort pretty heavily. It's why you haven't heard much from me during the day for the last month and a half. Is that I've spent a lot of time trying to find folks, and been on those interviews, and it's been very, very it's hard to find that talent. But I would say this is the other kind of funny thing about on that note is that, we've heard, and I remember at a Nova Hackers meetup, there was this whole debate about, there was someone who was wanting to be mentored, and they're like, yeah, I asked for mentorship and I need mentorship. And my mentor was like, I was there with Rob and Chris, actually. I remember all this. It was interesting because they were like, oh, I want a mentor. And, but my mentor just said, go read this book first, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that? I was like, we were all like, did you read the book? They're like, well, no, I want more direction. I was like, but did you read the fucking book first? Before you wanted more direction? So there was this whole debate back and forth about mentor expectations versus mentorship expectations and all that stuff, right? Okay, so fast forward, I've definitely had more than a handful of people come to me, especially since I started at GitHub, to say, this sounds like a really great field. I'm interested. I'm in college. I'm, doing whatever. I'm already in the IT field. I want to go this direction. I have a security minded sort of outlook. I'm like, cool, that's great. I will totally work with you. I am more than happy to. Without fail, man, every single person that I gave resources to, I gave them a roadmap, they went crickets, all of them, because the roadmap is hard. Yeah. And I was like, it's going to take a few years. Yeah, for sure. This is all the things you have to learn if you really want to get good at this. This is where you start. And I've done this for, like I said, more than a handful of people. And every time it's the same thing. It's all fired up and then it's crickets. And I feel like there is this, immediate satisfaction and gratification that folks are looking for. I think also people see like cybersecurity. It's like this hot thing. It's on all the ads on the radio and all of this stuff. And then you break it down and you're like, oh yeah, it's actually a lot of it's a lot of fundamental knowledge that you first have to have before you get to the cool part, before you get to the hacking part. Yeah, and so for whatever reason, like I said, that's been something that's been hard to find people with the follow through to grind on those sort of topics. So
yeah, I mean, I get it, right? Like it's a difficult proposition to actually get in to the level that we need to be at to actually help out, right? It's one thing to go and do bug bounties, to find little things, and like I'm super glad that there's that resource available nowadays to push people towards. But it's also like, I mean, you only get paid for the stuff that you find. And it almost rewards, this narrow focus on single classes of bugs that you can find across multiple places to maximize your income, right? As opposed to, hey, you're going to go and you're going to learn about a whole software, the whole SDLC from an application security perspective, how software is implemented, where the flaws exist, and why they're actually there. It doesn't mean that the bug bounty researchers don't go to that level at times, but I mean, honestly, right? Like in your GitHub program, what is the number of top performers or top researchers that you have that find those super cool bugs? It's a handful, isn't it? I wouldn't say it's hundreds.
No, it's a handful. Yeah, I would agree.
And I mean, the same thing is going to be for people that are getting into the industry. So it's, I mean, it's a difficult prospect. I don't know, man. We keep putting resources out there like that. That's just it. Trying to get, keep beginners, and new people to the industry, giving them the resources to be able to learn and to keep improving themselves. The people that are here and that we talk to on a daily basis, they're the ones that are constantly churning, looking at new data, new vulnerabilities, exploits, new approaches. They're pulling in stuff from research, from bug bounty, from developers. But getting into the industry, that can be overwhelming, right? And this is what we always, this is what we've been talking about, right? Is there's so many people trying to get into the industry. You've got this new policy from the White House. You've got, every company is looking for application or network security people. If you have a new approach to explaining an old vulnerability, go ahead and put it out, because it could speak to someone and light a fire under them, because your understanding of it is going to be different than somebody else's. The diversity in the industry is what makes it strong. If we only have OWASP that defines all the vulnerabilities, we're missing out on everything that could come in from other sources, right?
Yep. Did you want to talk about what you're thinking about putting together as a resource? Speaking of resources and all of this, or do you want to hold off on that?
Let's hold off on that until we have at least a little bit that we've put together. Okay. Ken and I are looking to turn Absolute AppSec into more of a resource as well, right? Not just the podcast, but
give you useful things.
Yeah, give you useful things that you can use, a place that you can point at to reference vulnerabilities and other things. So the first kind of big release that we have is in the works right now. But once we do push it out, then I'd rather have something than turn it into vaporware, right?
Yeah. Well, we won't tease it out then.
Yeah.
Did you want to mention our friends at Kenna Security? That cool news?
Oh yeah. Those of you that didn't hear, Kenna and our friend Jerry Gamblin, who's been on the podcast, multiple times, they were acquired, or the intent has been put out that Cisco is acquiring Kenna. And Kenna Security is it's an interesting platform, right? Like it's congratulations to Jerry.
Yes, congratulations.
You know, for being a part of that. We met Jerry years ago when he was working at Carfax of all places, but since then he's bounced around a little bit, and he's very active on Twitter, right? He's a good resource. If you want to follow somebody that's posting security news and opinion, follow Jerry.
Jerry is just constantly doing stuff, period.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's Kevin Cody and Jerry Gamblin might be the two. They make me feel lazy, put it that way.
Here, I'll post this. Jerry, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just Jerry Gamblin, isn't it? On Twitter.
Jay Gamblin.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
But like Kenna is an interesting solve, right? If you haven't looked at them before, you should go look and see what they're doing. I mean, they're basically taking vulnerabilities and then classifying them for work based on how they're used and what exploits actually work against them. Right? I mean, at this point, we have so many CVEs that are released on a daily basis that it's very difficult to know what should be a priority and what shouldn't. I mean, if you've ever helped someone even just look at like their third-party code that they're pulling in and the vulnerabilities that exist there from Sneak or Dependency Check or Dependabot, right? Like what should actually be solved and what isn't really an issue. It's a difficult problem to solve. It's a difficult to prioritize and not just say as a security person, oh, just go fix everything, go upgrade everything. And that's exactly, they identified it as a problem, came up with a platform that does prioritization based on, like exploitation factors, based on use, right? Like specific functions. If they get to know your environment, they can tell you whether or not a vulnerability that gets released for, jQuery affects your site or not. Which is incredibly important because I mean, from a business perspective, it means, all right, is this a drop everything on the floor and go fix it? Or is this something that could be put in the backlog and we just catch it the next time we do, jQuery upgrades? So anyway, they got acquired. Cisco, again, they're kind of the Borg out there. They acquire these security companies and then spin them into the different products that they have. But it should be a good run for those guys as they integrate over there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm somebody who's gone through an acquisition that went really smooth, and I really enjoyed the results of that acquisition. Totally, like thumbs up for them. So, I mean, it wasn't Cisco obviously that acquired us, but it was similar type Borg deal. So that's really cool. I'm very excited for them. That's really awesome, and yeah, hope y'all have a good time there. It should be cool. Man, we're getting towards the end here, and I feel like cock-a-doo-doo. So I'm wondering if what else you want to chat about, if anyone has anything else they want us to. My sinuses are flaring up real bad. So
yeah, I did want to mention that Bundler still vulnerable to dependency confusion stuff, right?
Totally forgot that one. Yeah,
and I mean, part of the reason this
interesting.
Part of the reason this popped up as well, like if you look in that White House order or whatever it is, they talk about enhancing software supply chain security, right? Like that's one of the things that's actually in the order is, how do we make sure that the software supply chain is secure? And then it comes out that like the tools that we use to keep it secure, they're not necessarily secure in and of themselves. So good luck with that, right? Like, apparently we're just security nihilists today, right? You can't get into the industry. You can't solve anything. That's, channeling my inner Stefan.
No, yeah. Like, I'm trying to pull up that. I had that. What's weird? Oh, I had it pulled up on another computer because I was like, why do I not have that article in front of me? Yeah. But like, what's interesting is just the fact that like their documentation, and let me pull it up and like show real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, just because it's like, this is funny. It's not funny, like it's just interesting. So, all right, let me share this screen. If I can figure out how to use a computer today. Boom. All right. It should be visible in a second here. All right.
Yep.
So, yeah. So what's just pretty interesting is like they show. So according to the documentation, if let's say Acme Logger was pulled in from your private package source here. So let me blow that up. So this is we talked about this before. This like little statement here declares that from this website, you can, install whatever gems, right? Whatever gems are in this loop here. So like you got Acme Logger. So in theory, if it's Acme Logger, it's going to pull in Acme Util, which is meaning Acme Logger has, a dependency. It's another package it depends upon, which is Acme Util. But according to the documentation, this Acme Util they'll search for this package from only this source and not from, say, the greater rubygems.org. What they found was, this researcher found that, however, if Acme Util 1.0. So like 1.0.0 lives at the private packages, and 1.0.1, library by the same name, it exists on rubygems.org. The newer version will be the one that it pulls in from rubygems.org instead of your private packages. So now bundler is being updated so that, any dependencies that private package relies upon are only being pulled from this server and not from any of your other sources. So that's in a nutshell what that's all about. So let me see, stop sharing here. Does that adequately describe it? I feel kind of dumb today, so hopefully that.
No, it does, right? It's. I mean, it makes sense. You look at it from a code perspective, and you're like, we see these versions that are out there, and I don't know, right? It's more something that you've got to be aware of at this point. So what versions you're running. You probably want to lock to specific versions that are in those repositories as you can. And I think that's what it says in that article as well.
Yeah.
But unless you're aware of it, it just makes sense that it's going to pull until it finds, right? And it's going to pull the latest version because you didn't specify.
Yeah, I didn't even mention that. You're right. Like you saw the line where it says gem Acme Logger. So if you can actually add an additional operator with like a squiggly line and an arrow and put a version in, and it'll say like, okay, cool, this is the version you're locked to in the gem file. The reason I say that is like there is a gem file.lock that also it's sort of like a frozen, all of these packages are at this version. That's what the .lock, just like a package.lock for a node. But anyways, you're right. You can point to the exact version too, and that would be helpful. So
yeah,
I don't know if you would need to do that for, I guess you'd be doing that for the dependency as well. It sounds like the dependency of the dependency. I don't know, that seems like not a great solution. So just, I guess, upgrade to bundler would be the better option.
But that's just it. Those implicit dependencies are the ones that are the problem, right? Like that's one of the options, is what they're saying there is, explicitly provide source for each dependency, right? Like, so actually do a source list gem for that dependency, because then it won't go out to rubygems.org to pull anything, or right, like publicly register all your gems, but the second that you forget one, right? I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot more research on dependency confusion and package managers. There's been a lot of focus the last, this year, but it's going to be an area of research for a long time, because of the nature of all these platforms that we have. And it also makes me wonder, right? We started talking about PHP and GoSDL, and I start to think about PHP dependencies as well. Because that's another mess, and there hasn't been as much focus because I don't think there's that same sort of centralized repository, or it's not as mature, or it's not as whatever, right? Like it's PHP. So anyway, good luck solving that, I guess, is the main the main takeaway there is it's not going to be easy. Cool. But I do think that's about everything that we've got for today, Ken. I know you're feeling it, so we can go ahead and call it for today. And we will be
surprised I got this far, man.
we will be back next week, right? Please jump into our Slack channel if you've got questions or you want to keep the conversation going. Ken and I are there. And otherwise, we'll just see everybody online. Hit us up on Twitter or in Slack.
Yeah, actually, also, if there are any requests for guests, I'm working on scheduling more guests for the summer. So I have my list, but if you have anyone you'd really like to see come on the show again, the show period, the podcast, let me know. Let Seth know. You can do that through the Slack DMs, or you can do absoluteappsec@gmail.com. Again, that's absoluteappsec@gmail.com if you have any guests that you'd like to see. So, yeah, that's all I have.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We'll see everybody online and next week.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you listening.